Good morning, friends, and welcome to a very special Windows on the World presentation on the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, a Jewish-Christian student interfaith exchange of shared learning between Temple Bet Shalom, a Jewish-Christian student interfaith exchange between Temple Bet Shalom in Needham, Massachusetts, about 10 miles outside of Boston, and Eastern University, a Christian liberal arts university with a motto of faith, reason, and justice. We are glad you have joined us. I'm Joseph Modica, and I serve as the university chaplain here at Eastern University. Just to let you know, this program is being recorded and archived by the university for educational purposes. Well, the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship officially began in the fall of 2015 and is named after the late Dr. Ted Chamberlain, who served Eastern University for nearly 30 years as Dean and Vice President of Student Development. I had the privilege of working closely with Dr. Chamberlain for 13 years. The fellowship is now in its 6th year. And here are just some photos of when Temple Bet Shalom students and Eastern University students are together at Temple Bet Shalom. Some of their experiences in Reform Judaism, and also just their building of significant relationships together. And of course, there's always a justice component, and there they are making soup for use in pastoral care at the temple. So what we're going to do now is take a look at an introductory video that will help frame this wonderful interfaith fellowship. So we'll share that now. What are the compelling things that hold us in that? What are the compelling things that hold us in that religious tradition?
We have shared stories and shared vocabulary and shared ways that we get together around the dinner table.
The Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship is a partnership between students at Eastern University and high school students at Temple Bet Shalom. We come together twice over the course of a year just to have interfaith conversations, to build bridges between our religions. I think there's something beautiful in the connection between the religions because we all share the same God. And because of that, I really wanted to apply for the fellowship. Something that's been a challenge is to think about this is how someone else sees the same thing that I'm looking at from a different light.
We kept having these conversations where Joe would say, here's something that I would want to talk about, and I would say, oh, here's a Jewish spin on that actually ends up being we start with the same word and it ends up with something completely different.
Some of my favorite parts just were when we were having fun. I loved the discussions. I loved getting to explore what I really believe in and solidifying that, being able to articulate it, I think was formative for me. My favorite thing that I learned, it's a hard question to answer, I think, because I don't know if it was a specific thing as much as just getting to learn about Jewish culture as a whole. They have so much symbolism tied into everything they do. I learned a little bit about what it means to be Jewish, both ethnically and in terms of faith. And I'm gonna be able to take that with me wherever I go. If I could say something to new fellows that are coming in, I would say it's really important to walk into this with the mindset of seek first to understand than to be understood. Let yourself be teachable. So I think going in and asking others questions and being curious, because that will incite curiosity in them as well.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that brief overview of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. Now, although we're in our 6th year, we're actually highlighting today the accomplishments of Cohort 5. As our Temple Bet Shalom friends were supposed to be at Eastern University for an in-person experience this past April, but due to the pandemic, it had to be canceled. As a sober reminder, especially as the pandemic seems to be on an uptick, let us remember to be vigilant, prayerful, and hopeful as we continue through this pandemic together. We are honored to have with us this morning Dr. Chamberlain's widow, a dear friend to myself in Eastern University, Lyria Chamberlain. And Lyria, why don't you give a wave there, as Lyria is here this morning. And next to her, her daughters, Kristen and Jenny, are also here. We're grateful for them being present too. We'll hear more about Dr. Chamberlain from my dear friend, David Feldman, when David offers some remarks in a few minutes. David and his wife, Sydney, through their vision, generosity, and steady leadership, established the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, and without them, there would simply be no fellowship. So Sydney and David, if you would wave, we would welcome you this morning. This fellowship includes students from each institution who complete an application and are interviewed. So as a public service announcement, if you are a student this morning from Eastern University and would like to apply for the fellowship for the next academic year, 2021-22, we're going to ask you to place your email address at the end in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get an application. Applications are generally given out in the spring semester, but if you're interested, we want to make sure that we have your email address. The Reverend Dr. Krista Stendahl was an influential and groundbreaking New Testament scholar and also served as the Church of Sweden Bishop of Stockholm. He served as professor and dean at Harvard Divinity School. He died in 2008. And we often look to Dr. Stendahl as a person who gives us some ways of understanding interreligious conversation. And what we have here is Dr. Krista Stendahl's 3 rules of religious understanding that help, among other things, help guide the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. The first one is, when trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. Number 2, don't compare your best to their worst. And lastly, number 3, leave room for holy envy. We sense that for the third point in particular, that we want to begin to appreciate the beauty in other religious traditions other than our own, and what are some things that we would want to have in our tradition, or maybe to emphasize in our tradition, that we can glean, a kind of holy envy, as Stendahl says. This is a compelling concept that has guided the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship during the last 3 years. It's interesting that an author, Barbara Brown Taylor, who is a best-selling author, teacher, and Episcopal priest, wrote a book called Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And my colleague at Temple Bet Shalom, Rachel Happel, and I read this book together and discussed it last summer. And it's interesting, in her final chapter, as she discusses her teaching of various religions on the undergraduate level at a college in Georgia, she says this: "The only clear line I draw these days is this. When my religion tries to come between me and my neighbor, I will always choose my neighbor. Jesus never commanded me to love my religion." Even though with the deep differences there are between Judaism and Christianity, and that we wrestle with those differences, we also look for the ways in which we can love our neighbor in our differences there. Now, I would like to introduce a kind and generous person, the founder and visionary leader, along with his wife, Sydney, of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, my friend David Feldman, to offer his remarks. David and Sydney epitomize the heart of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship with their abiding hospitality, care, and generosity. In January of 2018, David applied and received a $15,000 Community Service Award from Northwestern Mutual Insurance for his interfaith work. Here's a picture of President Matthews with David Feldman when that award was given. Would you please welcome this morning my friend David Feldman. Okay, David, let me just see if there's,
Can you hear me now, Joe?
yes.
You can hear me now? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, thank you very much. My apologies to the people that were at the opening gathering last night because they're going to hear a few of the same things again, but maybe from a different perspective. This fellowship between Eastern University and Temple Beth Shalom, its purpose is to bring together students, as previously referenced, from different religious backgrounds and cultures together to participate in an educational experience where they learn about each other's faiths in a friendly and supportive environment. They participate in classes, religious services, discussion groups, and community service projects under the supervision of trained professionals. And as a result, they bond together by breaking down barriers and building bridges of understanding. They learn that they actually have more in common than they do apart. So the goal of this initiative is to prepare participating students to enter a world which unfortunately has become increasingly diverse with new skills, insights, and understanding, allowing them to better relate to people who may be very different from themselves, but in reality are more similar than they may have imagined. The initiative has a profound meaning to me personally, because it memorializes the legacy of literally my very first friend with whom I shared a 65-year relationship. It sustains the strong interfaith connections between the three generations of our families and builds upon that theme for the benefit of students from both institutions. Ted Chamberlain had a remarkable ability to maintain a strong Christian faith while relating to people from all walks of life. I respected his intellects, the books he wrote, the missions he performed, and the consulting engagements he had. He was void of arrogance, yet very talented as a teacher, administrator, counselor, athlete, author, parent, grandparent, and thankfully, my good friend. What set him apart from most was his sincere interest in learning about those whose backgrounds were different from his, but in a very non-judgmental way. It made him a better person and in turn influenced those with whom he shared relationships. He was as comfortable participating in a Passover Seder as he was in a church service in his own faith. Eastern was so very fortunate to have him as their Dean of Students for 28 years. Ted died suddenly in 2010. While his physical presence is gone, his soul will live on in the memories of his good deeds that are implanted in the minds of all who knew him. This fellowship gives me, my wife, and our family the opportunity to focus on what he represented and the values for which he stood. We are deeply grateful to Joe Modica and Betty Ann Brigham from Eastern and Rabbi Jay Perlman and Rachel Happel from Temple Beth Shalom for their work in establishing this program and for their ongoing involvement to make it the success it has become. I wish this year's fellows who are participating in the program a rich experience. I look forward to the time when we'll be able to return to learning in a more normal environment as we visit each other's educational settings in person. That having been said, I am grateful for the ingenuity and creativity of both Joe Modica and Rachel Happel, which will make this program a success once again. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David, for those remarks. And as I recall, at Temple Bet Shalom, may Dr. Chamberlain's memory be for a blessing. And that's what we do here at the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. Thank you, David. That's very important as we continue moving forward in our 6th year. Well, as the university chaplain, I'm privileged to collaborate with a terrific person in this Interfaith Fellowship, Rachel Happel, which I have done so since the beginning of the fellowship. She epitomizes commitment to student-centeredness and flourishing, as well as a commitment to a vibrant and integrative Jewish education for students. It's refreshing to see such a commitment in a religious context. Rachel received both her Master's of Arts in Jewish Communal Service and an MBA from Brandeis University, and as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree from Williams College. We're delighted that Rachel's oldest daughter, Evie, is going to be part of Cohort 6. So we look forward to having Rachel's daughter have an experience in the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. What we're going to do next is I'm going to invite Rachel to introduce the Temple Bet Shalom Cohort 5 Fellows. I'll follow by briefly introducing Eastern University's Cohort 5 Fellows, and then we have some of those reflections about the fellowship, the challenges and the blessings. Some of them are pre-recorded, and some of the fellows are actually here in person and will reflect on their experience. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe, and thank you for that nice introduction. It is always such a joy to come to Eastern. I am excited to be there virtually this year, but it does feel like coming home each year, given the 6 years that we've worked together, and it feels like going to visit extended family. So thank you for that welcome, and someday we will be in person together again, but for this year, this is great too. We have 3 Chamberlain Interfaith Fellows from Temple Beth Shalom from Cohort 5. Because it is a Friday morning and they are in school, 2 of them were unable to join us for this, but one is able to be here during a free period. So I'll introduce him first. So Josh Kesselman, who is a senior at Needham High School, give a wave, Josh, yep. Who is here. He's in a public space, hence the mask. So thank you for joining us. And our other 2 fellows are David Baylett, also a senior at Needham High School, and Jack Gordon, also a senior at Needham High School. And you will hear their words, which they have pre-recorded. So we'll get to hear from them virtually as well.
Many thanks, Rachel. For our Eastern University Chamberlain Interfaith Fellows for Cohort 5, we're delighted to have Thomas Myers, who is a theology major and a junior. We also have Dan Main, a middle-level education student who is a junior this year. Maya Hunt, an English major, part of the Templeton Honors College and a junior. Thomas is also part of the Templeton Honors College. And then finally, Jordan Evans, a nursing major who is a junior. And I will say, and I'll call on each of you when it's time for you to offer your perspective, but, and Rachel can attest to this, we have students that really are curious and they are insightful and they work hard in this fellowship. They meet with us, they meet separately, we meet together, we read a book together, we try to experience in an educational way as well as an experiential way, both religions. And so I'm grateful for all the hours our Temple Bet Shalom students have put in, as well as our Eastern University Chamberlain Interfaith Fellows. So what we're going to do then is I'm going to be showing pre-recorded. We'll begin with Thomas, and then I'll go through each of the fellows. And then when there's a fellow that will speak live, I will just mention you by name. So let's listen to what we've asked them to share a bit. And again, this will be, some will emphasize more than the other, perhaps, are some of the challenges of interfaith learning, interfaith experience, and some of the real blessings of interfaith learning and experience. So that's what they've been reflecting upon. So let's listen.
Hello, my name is Thomas Myers. I am a junior theology and business double major, and I'm currently a member of the 5th cohort of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. I'm sorry I'm unable to join you in person this morning, but reflecting on some of my experiences, I'm just very grateful to be a part of the fellowship, and having the chance to go up last fall to experience Temple Beth Shalom and the people there was absolutely incredible. And I guess thinking about interfaith relationships and the fellowship maybe in particular, you raise this question of what is truth, and when we begin to think that our truth is the only truth and that is the truth period, we automatically discredit someone else's belief or religion or their practice, and so we can't do that. And what the fellowship has kind of taught me is that everyone's truth is their own, and that who is to say my truth is any better than someone else's truth? And so what that does is it allows us to appreciate the other person, the whole person, and to appreciate what they think and why they think it. I love the idea of interfaith relationships. One, because I want to go into ministry one day myself, and I think that when Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, he doesn't just call us to love our Christian neighbor. He calls us to love our neighbor, period. No matter what they look like, no matter what language they speak, or what the color of their skin, their faith practice, it doesn't matter. I think that God calls us to love our neighbor. And so when we engage in these interfaith practices, I think ultimately love our neighbor. I think we do what God has called us to do. And so this is just one reason why I really do appreciate the fellowship and all that it's done for me. So thank you for listening, and I hope you guys had a great Windows on the World.
They're really good kids.
What I admire about Christianity is a strong belief in God. One of the fundamental beliefs of Christianity is that of God.
Were you able to hear that okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Kind of hit the wrong button here. Okay, we will go back there. Thank you. Oh, let's see here.
What I admire about Christianity is a strong belief in God. One of the fundamental beliefs of Christianity is that of God. The first line of the Apostles' Creed is, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. That belief in God unites all Christians together. Whether Catholic or Protestant, they share the same core belief in God. For Jews, we are allowed to question the existence of God, and because that does not unite us, our tradition is what unites us. The difference between us is what comes first, faith or practice. God helps to establish the values of Christians, what is perceived as right and wrong. The teachings of Jesus are used to guide them in their journey through the world. I really respect how they view the world. They use their faith as a lens to the world. They use it to help them see the best in people and to be the best person they can be.
Okay. We'll have now Maya Hunt come, and she's here live in the Zoom room, and she'll be able to share her thoughts.
Thanks, Joe. I have found that I think one of the most fulfilling pieces of CIF has been the opportunity to actually understand the pieces of Jewish culture that are so often brushed aside. It's really easy to just see stereotypes or the small pieces of an experience and assume that that's a perfect picture of what we see. And I think actually sitting down with our Jewish fellows and seeing that their experiences of Judaism are so vastly different than anything I might have understood before. Just like my experience of Christianity might be so vastly different than our other fellows from Eastern, and just seeing that there is so much variety and they all still come together and are able to be part of the same community. That sense of unity despite difference, even within the tradition, is really fulfilling. And it's also hard to wrap my head around sometimes. So it's so good to see a good image of it and good practice from good stewards.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Josh Kesselman. When I started to reflect on my views before the Chamberlain Fellowship, I also thought about my own views about Christianity. As a Jew in a Christian world, I thought I was fairly knowledgeable, with a good grasp of the beliefs and practices of this religion. I especially thought that Christianity was far less diverse than Judaism. Whereas the practice of Judaism varies for every person that identifies as Jewish, I believed that all Christians, no matter what denomination they followed, were ideologically the same. It took me less than an hour to be proved wrong. Even among 5 people from the same university, most of whom were Protestants, the range of beliefs were shocking, with differing views on God, the roles of religious leadership, various social issues, and different ideological ideas. These were often just as many similarities between religions as there were between denominations in the same belief system, and I was amazed by how narrow-minded my view had been. Since those meetings, I've tried to think more carefully about how I view others' beliefs, without assuming that I know their views. Interfaith dialogue only works if both sides accept the other side knows their own beliefs and ideas and don't try to impose their own thoughts. No religion is a monolith, and no belief is wrong if it comes from a place of love and acceptance. It is only through accepting this that true interfaith dialogue can ever exist.
Okay, we'll have Dan now from Eastern University share his thoughts.
One of my favorite parts of the fellowship was a lot of the time when we were just able to kind of talk about our own religions. And it was interesting to me realizing that like everyone, when we talk about making your religion your own in Christianity, we mean within a set of guidelines usually, like still within A, B, and C. But in Judaism, that can really mean a lot of different things, especially because people are ethnically Jewish or practicing. And it was really like interesting to hear that, but also hard to kind of wrap my mind around that, kind of what Maya said. Just because I'm used to like, okay, here are the things that you need to believe, and this is what we believe. And then within Judaism, it's like, okay, here's what you can experience and here's what you're learning. And I think that that was really cool to just see how diverse it is within the religion. Yeah, I just thought that that was really cool. And there were so many awesome takeaways from just like conversations within the dialogues we had, because you can try to understand people, but it's hard to fully be able to appreciate them without actually being in conversation and relationship with them.
Thank you, Dan. We'll listen now to another TBS fellow.
The Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship has caused immense personal growth for me in many ways, and one of the influential changes for me has been a deepening appreciation of my own faith. Coming into the fellowship, I did not consider myself to be a very religious person. My connection to Judaism was mostly through social events like youth group and traditions like holidays at my grandparents'. However, I remember the exact moment when something clicked, and I realized that I wanted to get more involved spiritually with my religion. I was sitting next to one of the students from Eastern University, Thomas, and I was explaining to him the different parts of a bar mitzvah as we watched a young boy become a man in the eyes of the Jewish community. As I spoke with Thomas, I realized how passionately I was speaking and how I had lost some of this connection since my own bar mitzvah. Since that moment, I have made an effort to get back in touch with my religion, and I've seen the change. Even though we were online this fall, high holiday services touched me more than any year prior, and I felt more connected to Judaism while praying than ever before. I look forward to seeing where this newfound connection takes me in the future, and I am grateful to the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship for giving me the opportunity for this to happen.
Okay, and then our final fellow from Eastern University, Jordan, share us your thoughts.
Well, I'd have to say one of my favorite moments from when we visited TBS last fall was it was after a learning session, and we were all just gathered together around the table, just started having a deep conversation on our views on what we thought happened after death, basically. So it was a very intense conversation, but and it was also very challenging, honestly, but it opened up my own eyes and to really think about what I believed, and also made me realize, like, I was so set on having these like core beliefs kind of thing, and it opened my eyes into why I really believe that way, and made me kind of challenge my faith. I think that's really important, to really think about your own faith and why you believe those things, because growing up a Christian, I've always been a Christian. You know, I've never really just asked myself why I believe those beliefs and why I necessarily believe in God. So it really challenged me, and I really have a newfound appreciation for my faith, just like all the previous fellows have shared. I also really loved seeing how they really focus on tradition, and they find a new way of celebrating those traditions, I feel like, each year. And hearing the passion behind, like, what David was sharing, like his love of getting to have his bar mitzvah, and all of that behind that, it made me realize what are some traditions I have in my own belief that are really important to me. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you to all the fellows, Temple Bet Shalom and Eastern University. Interfaith shared learning is work, and it has its challenges, but oftentimes those challenges can easily become blessings if we look at it in a way that helps us to grow in our own faith and our own tradition there. So thank you. It was wonderful. It's really all about the students. Rachel and I will say at the end of the day, it's not about what we're saying as much as what the students are experiencing. And as you go from each institution, how can you be more faithful in your own faith tradition by loving your neighbor because you get to know them? So thank you for that. Friends, we're going to take a few minutes. We do this each year where Rachel Happel and I will talk a little bit about these two questions in our own personal lives. I'm going to just put the questions, share them with you just so you can see them. What we're going to talk about. Roughly, it's going to be some of the compelling aspects of our own faith tradition, what we find compelling, what we find that roots us and gives us an anchor. And then secondly, as we talked about holy envy before from Krista Stendhal, what do we find compelling or have holy envy about from each other's tradition? Okay, I'll ask my colleague and interfaith partner, Rachel Happel will go first with the first question. What are some compelling aspects of your faith tradition?
Thank you, Joe. We do this every year, but I always find it hard to choose the most compelling aspects. I find a lot of it compelling, or I wouldn't have been called to do this work, but I picked 4. So one thing that I love about Judaism and that I find compelling that really guides my daily life are practices and rituals that help us mark time. and bring meaning to our lives. So we have rituals for everything. We have rituals for life cycle moments, whether that's Brit Milah when a child is born, or after somebody dies. We have particular, very specific rituals that we do. And what I love about that is that often at life's hardest moments, it would be hard to figure out what to do, but with a ritual to guide us, it sort of guides you through an emotional or spiritual process that might be hard to grapple with on your own. There's a way laid out for us to do that. And it really just marks time in our year, particularly in a year with a pandemic where time all just kind of blurs together, having that that marking time each week with Shabbat and throughout the year with holidays, I think helps as sort of a grounding force in my life. So that's a piece that I feel very compelling about Judaism, is those rhythms that mark time and the rituals that accompany them. Another piece is the concept of Yisrael. We are known as the people of Israel. Yisrael in Hebrew means that we wrestle with God. It literally means to wrestle with God. We don't have to have our relationship with God figured out in order to be Jewish. And there's something beautiful about that. I've had conversations my whole life with people about my own understanding of God, and it has changed and shifted over time. Another is the rich textual and liturgical tradition that we have. It connects Jews from all over the world. So I could go anywhere in the world on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and go into a synagogue, and we would be saying the same prayers in Hebrew, and we would be reading the same portion of the Torah every week, no matter where I was in the world. And there's something that really unifies us as a people, where no matter where we go, we are finding that familiarity in our texts. And finally, our commitment to chesed, which means kindness, through very specific acts. We're commanded to visit the sick, to welcome the stranger, to rejoice with a couple getting married, to comfort those who are mourning. And there are very specific ways that we do that. It's not just be nice, it's not just be kind, but really here are the specific things that you're commanded to do in order to do that in your life. So those are the top 4 that I picked for today. I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Would you believe I have the same 4? No, well, you're going to see some, honestly, in the Christian tradition, as a Christian, as a university chaplain, there are some overlap, as you'll immediately hear. But I also have 4 items that I was thinking about that keeps me Christian, that compels me in my Christianity. The first one is this Latin phrase called the Imago Dei, or that knowing that each person is made in the image and likeness of God is very compelling to me as I go about what it means to be a human being, but also what it means to be in the vocation of a university chaplain, the Imago Dei, that everyone bears God's image, and the way we treat people should reflect that. The second one is related, another I word. If you're taking notes, you don't have to take notes. This is not note-taking here, but it's the incarnation. The incarnation to me is such a compelling Christian doctrine. Incarnation meaning God came in the flesh in Jesus of Nazareth. God became flesh and dwelt among us. And literally the word incarnation means incarnate. And when you ever think about chili con carne, in meat, it literally means God came in meat. God came in flesh. And I find that so compelling. I don't always understand it fully, but I do believe it wholeheartedly. The Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14 says, "And the Word, meaning Jesus, became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth." Following Jesus, knowing that Jesus is God incarnate, helps me to understand what human flourishing should look like, even if we're not there yet, following his teachings, his life, his ministry. Third thing is hospitality. Now, certainly hospitality is not a uniquely Christian thing. I find great gifts of hospitality at Temple Bet Shalom. But I believe in the Christian tradition, we need to have welcoming spaces for people, regardless of who they are, what they've been through, how people have been labeled. We want to welcome them. We want to embrace them. We want to care for them. We want to be hospitable. And that's such an important virtue for me. Jesus, in one of his parables in the Gospel of Matthew, in the 25th chapter, is telling a parable to his disciples. And he says, he's kind of giving them a little bit of an indictment, but he said, remember, I was once a stranger and you welcomed me. And remember, welcoming the stranger is, Jesus being a Jew, we have good in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, we have importance of welcoming stranger. And lastly, justice. Lastly, justice. In the Christian tradition, like in Judaism and other traditions, is what does it mean to live justly in the world? What does it mean to live justly? So following Jesus for me, Jesus's teachings, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount, helps me to guide what my ethical, moral kinds of responsibilities ought to be in the world. And as you can probably hear, there is some overlap with what Rachel said, and that's not surprising. Jesus being a Jew, that's not a surprise, even though things kind of diverted and in different ways, but there's a real good chord there. Okay, Rachel Happel, question number 2. So what do you find compelling in Christianity? What do you have holy envy about? What do you love about Christianity?
So many things as I learn more and more about it. Holy envy. First of all, I just love the concept of holy envy, because as a child, I definitely had unholy envy, I would say, when I grew up in a neighborhood that was mostly Catholic children, Catholic families, and a lot of my counterparts got the beautiful white dress for their first communion. I would call that unholy envy. However, over time, I've learned so much more. And one thing that I absolutely love is the opportunity for spontaneity and personalization of prayer that I have seen in Christian settings, where in Judaism, we have this concept of keva, which means fixed prayer, and kavanah, which means intention or sincere feeling. And we're always trying to balance the two. But when called upon for a blessing, there usually is a specific blessing that you're supposed to say. So you're before a meal, there's a blessing for that. After you use the bathroom, there's a blessing for that. I mean, there are blessings for everything in Judaism with very particular words. What I have seen at Eastern University and in other settings where I have been is that saying grace or saying a blessing can take many different forms, and it seems to come either very spontaneously from the person who's leading it, or it's been very personalized to the specific setting. And I just love that personalization of the words of blessing that comes with it. And along with that personalization, number 2, is the real personal relationship with God. The idea of speaking directly to God or hearing God's voice in our daily lives. I was really struck a couple of years back when Nika Skelton, who was one of the fellows in Cohort 3, I think, and she talked a lot about hearing God's voice in her daily life, and it's not a concept that we talk about a lot in Judaism. That sort of personal. We talk about God's presence or sort of being influenced by ideas of God and God's actions, but not that personal hearing God's voice as something that guides our life. And I would love to see that more. And then number 3. Is the real accessibility. Christianity feels very accessible and welcome. And while I'm sure it's not easy to be Christian, it does feel like all the barriers have been removed for becoming Christian. If one were to decide to become Christian, it feels like there's a very easy path to do that in terms of accepting a set of beliefs. And I'm sure there's a lot of wrestling that goes with that, but that accessibility piece is something that I have holy envy for. Thanks. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Rachel. Beautiful. So here are things I find beautiful when I visit Temple Bet Shalom. So holy envy is something that I admire, that I find beautiful. The first one is just meaningful rituals and rhythms. I just love that. When we go to the Shabbat service, to the Minyan prayer service, we got an experience with Bar Mitzvah last year. I think for me, it helps to mark the various important events in a person's life religiously. It gives and anchors and shapes a community. They do things together. And I really do admire the sense of, you might say, I know in Christianity we have a church calendar, but in Judaism, their holy days are really significant in the sense of marking time, as Rachel said. The second thing, when you first walk into Temple Bet Shalom, you're greeted by a wonderful person that's sitting at the desk. Students will remember from Cohort 5. But as you lean into the left side, you see a library. You see books. One thing about that I have holy envy about is the focus on what I call integrative education, holistic education, the life of the mind, but the life of the heart. And they're integrated. I just love that they believe in education and study and reflection. I'm going to quote Krista Stendhal again. You might think I like Krista Stendhal, but this is what he said almost near the time when he died. He was interviewed by the Harvard Divinity Bulletin. This is what he said about the differences between Christians and Jews. Now remember, he's a Christian and he was the dean at Harvard Divinity School. He says, "We Christians, when we meet Jews, are inclined to say, 'Let's pray together.' Jews, when they meet Christians for fruitful encounter, are inclined to extend a different kind of invitation. 'Let's study together. Let's study together.'" I just find that such holy envy there. Third, and I'll do this quickly, I sense at Temple Beth Shalom a real sense of belonging first before believing. Belonging first before believing. Now, there's nothing wrong about believing. I believe things. But as a Christian coming into a Jewish context, I felt belonging. I felt like I belonged really quickly. And that was a beautiful, beautiful aspect. As a matter of fact, I get an opportunity to speak at the Shabbat service on Friday evening, just to be able to have that space with the congregation. I feel like I'm an honorary member of Temple Beth Shalom. But that's because of the inclusivity and the welcome. And last but not least, Tikkun Olam, or the concept, as I understand, about repairing the world, that there's something broken in the world. And again, I find that with holy envy. Now, I talked about justice in the Christian tradition, and I certainly believe that. But I also think Tikkun Olam, from what I could understand, is really looking at the broader picture about not just topical justice, but kind of having justice infused in everything that we do. So not issue driven, and I'm not saying Christians are always issue driven, but sometimes they can be, but really having it infused in everything that they do. So those are my holy envy, things I'm learning from our friends at Temple Beth Shalom. Friends, we have come to the near the end of our time together, although we do have a few more minutes, and I'm going to take the risk to see if there's any questions. So we have, if you have to go to class, for those who are students, you can leave now. But it's about 10 to 11. We could have maybe 5 minutes or so. Would that be okay? I also want to recognize there are a couple students here from Cohort 6, Caitlin Casey, and I think Andrew Lopez. Welcome. We're grateful that you're here. And do you have any questions for our friends from Temple Beth Shalom? That would be, don't ask me the question, although you could, but just anyone from Temple Beth Shalom, you're curious about it. Let's take a few minutes if there's any questions. Or any comments. It doesn't have to be a question, anything that you're interested in.
I know that I personally am a part of Cohort 6. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I am very honored to be a part of such a longstanding tradition at Eastern, even though it hasn't been around very long, just to see the beauty and the connection and the relationships that have been made already. I'm very, very honored to be able to step into that and to just kind of grow more within that dialogue and relationship that we have.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to,
Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. I'd like to go off of that. I would say that there really is beauty in the differences that each faith has, but but definitely coming to an understanding of sorts and understanding the perspective that each faith has, I think really shows, this, we get a stronger connectedness in seeing, what the perspectives are between each faith and why do we believe what we believe.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, if there are no other questions, I always say this at the end of kind of these presentations, and I truly mean what I say. The world needs the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. I'll just leave it as that. God bless you and God keep you. And we hope to see you soon in whatever capacity, whether in another Zoom meeting or for some of us on campus. God bless you. Have a good rest of the day.